Hey everyone, Coty here. And today I want to talk to you about burnout and how you can stay productive even if you're going through kind of a burnout phase. If you're a creative person like me, you're going to hit those points eventually where sometimes you just don't want to do the things that you love to do. And if you have depression like I do, it may even get to the point where it could be something you love to do, something that you're just very passionate about. And the desire to do it just dries up like that. And it happens, and that's okay. But I want to give you three things that you can kind of do if you're in this place of burnout where you just don't have that desire to create. So basically all three of these start with P, so the three P's of staying productive. And productive is not one of those P's. But so the first thing is to persevere. Now, a lot of times when you're not feeling creative, sometimes you just kind of have to give yourself a nudge and show up to the canvas or show up to the page if you're a writer, whatever your creative endeavor is. Maybe it's music. Sometimes you just have to show up and you have to persevere through those feelings, because a lot of times our feelings lie to us, right? So our feelings will tell us, like, maybe you weren't creative to begin with, or maybe, you're dealing with kind of imposter syndrome that kind of leads to the burnout. Maybe you're just tired and, or you have a lot of things going on in your life, just a lot of stress. And so your feelings will tell you, you know what, you just can't create. Well, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes you just show up and you put in an effort, and even if it's crappy, something might come out of it. I often talk about how Stephen King has mentioned how there are days where he doesn't want to write, but he just writes anyway. He writes whatever, he needs to get done for the day, whether he feels like it or not. And some days it feels like he's shoveling crap from a sitting position. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are times where I didn't want to write, but I would still kind of put myself in the state to write or to paint. And I would still produce something, and maybe going into it, I didn't feel inclined to make anything. I didn't feel motivated to make something, but I still showed up and I put in an effort. And sometimes I made some really good pieces, or I wrote a decent piece of content that I really actually liked a lot that wouldn't have come out if I didn't show up. So sometimes you just have to persevere through those feelings, and the feelings come back. The feelings of wanting to create will come back. Sometimes that happens. Now, if you find yourself showing up and you're putting in an effort and everything you're doing is just crap, or you're trying and there's just no result at all, then you can kind of move into the second thing that I would suggest, and that is to pivot. So sometimes you just need to take a break from what it is you're doing and work on a different project or work on a different type of outlet. For me, I went from painting for a few years to writing. Now, I had been writing off and on for many years on different subjects, so I've kind of come in and out of writing. It's kind of woven into the fabric of my being. But, I moved from painting because I lost that passion. Now, I don't think that the painting was my life's, culmination of artistic, endeavor. But I think with the writing, it is. Writing is kind of what I've always been really good at and comfortable with. But even at that, there are times where I just feel like I cannot write. But going from painting back to writing, I was able to kind of get a different flame going. And a lot of times we feel this, right? If you're creative, sometimes you find yourself starting a ton of projects and never finishing them. And, that does happen, and you need to be disciplined about finishing projects. But at the same time, sometimes starting a new project will give you that fire. And it at least gives you something to do until the other thing kind of rekindles. Because a lot of times I've found that it does come back after a while. You do get those feelings of wanting to create the initial thing eventually over time. And so with that, you just have to kind of maybe pivot to something else. So sometimes it just takes doing some other thing to feel incentivized to return to the original thing. And maybe you don't return to it ever or for a while, and you just stick with this other thing that you're very excited and passionate about now. And that's okay too. Sometimes moving into something else that you're excited and kind of striking while the iron is hot helps you to find a new passion or a new hobby or something like that. So I'm not suggesting that you go off and start a million projects, but if you go from one to another, temporarily or even for an extended amount of time, I don't see the harm in that, because you're still, kind of feeding and fulfilling that need to create. It just may be in a different form. And I found this, like I said, when I went from painting to writing, I found a lot of people were like, oh, I missed the painting. I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry you missed that, but I really enjoy writing and I'm pretty decent at it. So sometimes it just takes pivoting from one thing to another. Now, if you are in the dreaded place of pretty much darkness of creativity, like your creativity well has run dry, or you just feel like you can't put anything out even if you wanted to, then the last suggestion that I have for you is to promote. And so what I mean by that is simply just work on promoting your work that you've already done. If you're trying to make money from the art or the creative things that you're making, sometimes you need to kind of step away from the actual creation process. Now, a lot of us, if you're an artist or an author or a musician, whatever, the fun part is making those pieces, right? That's like the whole thing, right? A lot of artists love to create, but they don't like to promote, right? They don't like to promote themselves. Maybe they don't want to put themselves on a pedestal. Maybe they don't know how to go about promoting their work. Maybe they just, they feel awkward kind of putting it out into the ethos and telling people about it. It's like you want to tell people about it, but you also don't want to tell people about it, if that makes sense. I've been there. I go through that all the time. But the thing is that if you're trying to make money or just kind of get some kind of recognition or build up a repertoire, you have to promote yourself somewhat. Now, I'm not saying you have to go out and just kind of shove your art down people's throat or anything like that. What I'm saying is that you should promote the stuff that you've done in some way that people can at least start to recognize. Now, for me, YouTube was a huge part of that. It was a huge component in how I started getting discovered by people. In fact, I had people emailing me or messaging me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, telling me like, hey, I saw your videos and I wanted to try the tutorials, or they did try the tutorials and they couldn't really replicate it, and they saw the pieces I was making and they really liked those pieces, so then they bought the pieces because they saw the videos. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that anyone will get sales from that, but a lot of times if you're kind of in a creative rut, then it helps to just kind of look back on the stuff that you've already done and kind of promote that. Put it on social media, maybe set up a blog or, whatever, post it somewhere where it can be sold, or just, share it on different art websites. It really doesn't matter how you go about it. But if you're in that place where you just cannot create no matter how hard you try, that's really about the best thing that you could do. That way you're still kind of feeding into it. You're still in that creative space of your work. And you can kind of do some of the back end stuff that, we don't always like to do as artists, but you could do it and you could still kind of feed into that and you're staying productive. But ultimately that's it. So doing those three things is kind of what I do when I feel like I'm not creative. There is probably some level of insecurity inside of me that screams that if I am not creating, I am nothing. If I'm not putting words on a page or paint on a canvas or whatever, I'm nothing. Part of my identity comes from that. And I know it's not healthy. I know it's not necessarily great, right? But I know that part of me is there. And so if I'm not creating, I feel like I am not yielding any kind of value to the world. So that's just my place. And I know that by doing some of this stuff, by switching from one thing to another, or just showing up and or promoting the work I've already done, I can at least kind of stay in that creative field and then just work on it until those feelings come back. And if they never come back, they don't come back. I mean, you can't force it, but you can try, and you can try to do other things at least to fill that gap. But that's pretty much it. Those are my suggestions for, if you're going through a creative rut or burnout. Maybe switch it up, maybe show up a little bit, show up a while, keep showing up. And if it's just not happening, and you're putting in an honest effort, then pivot. And if you move into something else and that's just not rekindling the flame, you don't have any passion for that thing, or you're just not finding that thing is fulfilling to you, then just move into promoting your previous work and hope that will eventually come back, and just kind of promote until it does. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. And I'll see you guys in some other video some other time. I make no promises.